The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Michael Preston's Beverly Hills mansion, creating abstract patterns across Italian marble floors that cost more than most people's homes. He stood at the window, crystal tumbler in hand, watching the city sprawl beneath him. A kingdom of concrete and dreams he'd conquered, yet felt no victory in ruling. The ice in his glass clinked softly as he took another sip of 18-year-old scotch, a drink that had lost its ability to impress him years ago. At 42, Michael had achieved everything society deemed worthy of pursuit. A tech empire built from scratch, a fortune that made headlines in Forbes, and a name that opened every door in Los Angeles. Yet here he stood, alone in a 15,000-square-foot monument to success, feeling like a stranger in his own life. His phone buzzed on the marble counter behind him, probably Marcus, his CFO, with another update about their latest acquisition. The company had grown beyond his wildest dreams, expanding into markets he hadn't even imagined when he started coding in his garage 15 years ago. But lately, each new victory felt hollow, each milestone just another notch on an increasingly meaningless belt of achievements. Michael turned from the window, his Italian leather shoes echoing in the vast empty space of his living room. The interior designer had done an impeccable job. Every piece of furniture, every artwork, every subtle detail spoke of wealth and refined taste. Yet nothing spoke of home, of warmth, of life actually lived rather than merely displayed. He passed by the kitchen, all gleaming surfaces and high-end appliances that rarely saw use. The personal chef he'd hired came 3 times a week, leaving perfectly portioned meals that Michael often forgot to eat, lost in work or restless thoughts. Tonight's dinner would probably go untouched, like so many others. Upstairs, in his home office, the wall of achievements stared back at him. Framed magazine covers, awards, certificates, paper testimonies to his success. His eye caught the latest edition, a cover story in Business Weekly, Michael Preston, the digital king of LA. The photographer had captured him perfectly. Sharp suit, confident smile, every hair in place. It was the image everyone expected, the one he'd crafted so carefully over the years. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from his sister Lisa. They hadn't spoken in months. Their relationship, like so many others in his life, had fallen victim to his relentless pursuit of success. The message was brief. Mom's birthday next week. Will you make it this year? He didn't respond immediately, knowing his track record for family events was poor at best. Last year, he'd missed it for a board meeting. The year before, a product launch. Each time, there was always a good reason, always something crucial that couldn't wait. But sitting here now, he struggled to remember what had been so important about those meetings, those launches, those endless hours of work. The buzzer for his gate interrupted his thoughts. Through the security camera feed, he saw James's Tesla pulling up the circular driveway. His oldest friend, perhaps his only real friend, had been trying to drag him out of his self-imposed isolation for months now. James was one of the few people who still saw through the carefully constructed facade of Michael Preston, CEO and digital innovator. "Your house is turning into a mausoleum," James announced as he strode in, not waiting for an invitation. He was dressed casually in jeans and a polo shirt, a deliberate contrast to Michael's tailored suit. "When was the last time you actually used any of these rooms?" Michael gestured vaguely with his glass. "I used them. Walking through them to get from your bedroom to your office doesn't count." James settled onto one of the pristine leather couches, purposefully rumpling its perfect arrangement. "You need to get out more. Meet people. Real people, not just investors and board members." "I meet plenty of people." "Yeah, and how many of them know your coffee order? How many would notice if you didn't show up tomorrow?" James leaned forward, his expression serious. "When was the last time you went on a date that wasn't arranged by your PR team for some event?" Michael walked back to the window, avoiding his friend's knowing gaze. The sun had almost set now, and the city lights were beginning to twinkle like earthbound stars. "I don't have time for dating. The company is doing fine. More than fine. You've built an empire, Michael." "But what's the point of all this?" James gestured at the massive house. "If you're just going to live like a monk in a very expensive monastery?" The truth in James's words stung more than Michael wanted to admit. His days had fallen into a monotonous pattern. Wake up, work out with his personal trainer, meetings, more meetings, deals, decisions, dinner alone or with business associates, sleep, repeat. Weekends were just weekdays with fewer meetings. Holidays were opportunities to catch up on work without interruption. There's a charity gala next week, James continued, pulling out his phone. The Children's Hospital Foundation. Your presence would make a difference, and not just for the donation you'll inevitably make. Another networking event? Michael sighed. No, a chance to be human for a change. Meet people who care about something other than stock prices and market share. James stood up, straightening his shirt. I'm not asking you to find the love of your life. Just show up. Talk to people. Remember what it's like to have conversations that don't end with signing contracts. After James left, Michael stood in his vast foyer, listening to the echoing silence of his home. The cleaning service had been there earlier, erasing any trace of human presence, making everything perfect and pristine and utterly lifeless. He walked through the rooms, really looking at them for the first time in months. The home theater he'd never used. The wine cellar stocked with bottles he'd never share. The guest rooms that had never seen a guest. The pool that existed only for the maintenance crew to clean. Every space was a testament to wealth and success, and every space was empty of meaning. That night, sleep eluded him as usual. He lay in his massive bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about James's words. The emptiness of his life had become impossible to ignore, a void that no amount of success could fill. His phone lay on the nightstand, Lisa's message still unanswered. In the darkness, Michael made a decision. He reached for his phone and typed a quick reply to his sister, "I'll be there." Then, after a moment's hesitation, he sent another message to James, "Send me the details for that gala." As he finally drifted off to sleep, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. He'd spent years building walls around himself, constructing a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt increasingly hollow within. Maybe it was time to let those walls crack, just a little. The morning brought his usual routine, but something felt different. As his trainer pushed him through his workout, as his assistant reviewed his schedule, as his driver navigated through LA traffic, Michael found his thoughts wandering to the upcoming gala. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of something that might have been anticipation, or perhaps just the recognition that his carefully controlled life needed to be shaken up. He arrived at his office, a glass and steel tower that bore his company's name. His assistant, Sarah, followed him in with the day's agenda and a fresh cup of coffee, black, no sugar, just as he'd had it for the past decade. But today, looking at the same coffee he'd drunk every morning for years, he felt a sudden urge for change. "Sarah," he called out as she turned to leave. Could you add some cream to this? And maybe a sugar?" She paused, surprised. In 5 years, he'd never varied his coffee order. "Of course, Mr. Preston. Any particular kind of cream?" "Surprise me," he said, surprising himself as much as her. It was a small change, trivial really, but as he sipped the sweetened coffee and looked out over the city from his corner office, Michael felt something shift inside him. Perhaps James was right. Perhaps it was time to remember how to be human again. The rest of the week passed in a blur of meetings and decisions, but now there was an undercurrent of anticipation. He found himself paying more attention to the people around him, not just their roles and what they could do for the company, but their lives, their stories. He learned that Sarah was taking night classes in graphic design, that his driver had a daughter who was captain of her high school debate team, that the janitor who cleaned his office every evening was saving to open his own restaurant. Small details, human details, began to filter through the careful armor he'd built around himself. And with each detail, each small connection, the emptiness inside him became both more noticeable and somehow more manageable. It was as if acknowledging the void had somehow made it less overwhelming. The night before the gala, Michael stood in his closet, surveying his collection of perfectly tailored suits. Each one represented a different facet of his business persona: power suits for board meetings, subtle pinstripes for investor presentations, classic black for formal events. But tonight, none of them felt right. On impulse, he called James. "I need a new suit." he said without preamble. He could hear the smile in James's voice. Finally, I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. I know just the place. The boutique James took him to wasn't one of his usual tailors. It was smaller, more intimate, with an Italian owner who treated each customer like family. As the owner, Giuseppe, helped him select fabrics and styles, Michael found himself relaxing into the experience, enjoying the simple human interaction that came without agenda or expectation. For tomorrow's gala? Giuseppe asked, pinning the jacket. Very important event. Many beautiful people will be there. So I've heard, Michael replied, catching James's knowing grin in the mirror. But you're not going for them, Giuseppe said wisely, adjusting the sleeve. You're going for yourself. To remember who you are without the business suit, yes? Michael met his own eyes in the mirror, surprised by the insight. Yes, he said quietly. I suppose I am. That night, as he prepared for bed, Michael looked around his bedroom with new eyes. The space was impeccably designed, like everything else in his life, but it held no personality, no warmth. On impulse, he opened his laptop and began searching for art. Not the investment-grade pieces his advisors recommended, but things that spoke to him, that made him feel something. He found himself drawn to a series of photographs showing ordinary moments in extraordinary light. A child's laugh caught in summer sunshine, an old couple dancing in their kitchen, a solitary figure walking on a winter beach. Images of life, real life, not the carefully curated version he'd been living. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Michael realized he was looking forward to tomorrow, not dreading it, not seeing it as an obligation, but actually anticipating what might happen. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember. The void was still there, the emptiness still echoed through his massive home, but something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the walls he'd built, letting in a glimmer of possibility. Tomorrow would bring something new, something unknown, and for the first time in years, Michael Preston was ready to embrace that uncertainty. The Children's Hospital Foundation Gala transformed the historic Langham Huntington into a glittering wonderland. Michael adjusted his new suit, charcoal gray with subtle blue undertones that Giuseppe had insisted brought out his eyes, as he handed his keys to the valet. The familiar weight of expectations settled on his shoulders, but tonight it felt different, lighter somehow. The grand ballroom buzzed with Los Angeles elite, their conversations and laughter mixing with the soft strains of a jazz quartet. Michael navigated through the crowd, nodding at familiar faces, but for once not immediately seeking out the most strategically advantageous connections. James had been right. There was something liberating about attending an event without an agenda. That's when he saw her. She stood near one of the tall windows, the city lights creating a soft halo around her silver hair. Unlike the obvious wealth on display throughout the room, she carried herself with an elegant simplicity that made everything else seem overdone. Her deep blue dress caught the light as she turned, revealing laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of a life fully lived. Ah, I see you've noticed Evelyn. James materialized beside him, a knowing smile playing at his lips. She's on the hospital board. Brilliant woman. Used to be a pediatric surgeon before she retired. Michael found himself drawn toward her, his feet moving before his brain had fully processed the decision. As he approached, she turned to face him, and he was struck by the wisdom and warmth in her eyes. She had to be at least 20 years his senior, but there was something timeless about her presence. Dr. Evelyn Chase, she introduced herself, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. And you must be Michael Preston. James has told me quite a bit about you. All lies, I'm sure, Michael replied, surprised to find himself smiling genuinely. Oh, some truths mixed in, she laughed, and the sound seemed to cut through the artificial politeness that typically dominated these events. He mentioned you're quite the workaholic, though he failed to mention your eyes. The directness of her comment caught him off guard, but not unpleasantly. Giuseppe, my tailor, just told me they were worth highlighting. Giuseppe Romano? Her eyes lit up. That wonderful old Italian who treats everyone like family? I've known him for 30 years. He made my wedding dress, back when he first came to Los Angeles. The conversation flowed naturally from there, moving from Giuseppe to their favorite spots in Italy, to art, to music. Michael found himself sharing things he rarely discussed. His secret love of jazz piano, his childhood dream of being a photographer before technology captured his imagination. Evelyn listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was truly engaging with his words, not just waiting for her turn to speak. As the evening progressed, they found themselves on the terrace. The cool night air a welcome respite from the crowded ballroom. The city sprawled below them, a tapestry of lights and shadows. It's strange, Evelyn mused, looking out over the city. We spend so much time building our lives, constructing these elaborate facades of success, and then one day we look around and realize we've built a beautiful cage. The words hit uncomfortably close to home. Speaking from experience? She turned to him, her expression softening. Let's just say I recognize the look in your eyes. I had it myself once. That hunger for something real in a world of carefully crafted appearances. Their conversation deepened as the night wore on. Evelyn shared stories of her time as a surgeon, the lives she'd touched, the families she'd helped. But there was something else there too. A hint of sadness, of loss, that made her understanding of loneliness feel deeply personal. When James finally found them hours later, Michael realized he'd completely lost track of time. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened. Would you like to have dinner sometime? He found himself asking as they prepared to leave. Somewhere quiet, where we can actually talk? Evelyn studied him for a moment, as if weighing something in her mind. Yes, she finally said. I think I would like that very much. That dinner led to another and another. They met at small, out-of-the-way restaurants where the food mattered less than the conversation. Evelyn introduced him to hidden corners of Los Angeles he'd never known existed. Tiny bookshops, hole-in-the-wall jazz clubs, secret gardens tucked away in the urban sprawl. With each meeting, Michael felt layers of his carefully constructed facade falling away. Evelyn had a way of seeing through pretense, of asking questions that made him think deeply about who he was beneath all the success and achievement. Why do you push yourself so hard? She asked one evening as they walked through a small sculpture garden she discovered. What are you trying to prove, and to whom? The question caught him off guard, but he found himself answering honestly. I suppose I've always felt I needed to justify my existence through achievement. Success became a way of showing I mattered. And has it worked? Her voice was gentle, free of judgment. No, he admitted, the truth of it suddenly clear. No, it hasn't. Their relationship defied conventional labels. The age difference that might have seemed shocking to others felt irrelevant in the face of their deep connection. Evelyn's wisdom and experience complemented Michael's drive and energy, creating a balance he'd never known he was missing. But there were moments when something seemed to trouble her, shadows that passed across her face when she thought he wasn't looking. Sometimes she would start to say something, then stop herself, as if holding back a crucial piece of information. One evening, about 3 months after they'd met, Michael invited her to his home for the first time. The house had changed in subtle ways since that night of the gala. The photographs he'd admired online now hung on the walls, bringing warmth to the once sterile spaces. Fresh flowers appeared weekly in crystal vases. Small signs of life had begun to crack through the perfect facade. They stood on his terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Evelyn seemed unusually quiet, lost in thought as she gazed out over the city. What's troubling you? Michael asked, taking her hand. She turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Sometimes the past has a way of catching up with us, no matter how far we run. You can tell me anything, he said, meaning it completely. She squeezed his hand but said nothing more, turning back to watch the sunset fade into darkness. 2 weeks later, Michael found himself in Giuseppe's shop again, this time with a very different purpose. The old tailor took one look at his face and smiled knowingly. Ah, l'amour, he said, pulling out swatches of fabric. It changes everything, no? It does, Michael agreed, running his fingers over the fine materials. I need something special, Giuseppe. Something worthy of a very important question. The proposal itself was not the grand gesture many might have expected from someone of Michael's wealth and status. Instead, it was intimate, personal. as real as everything else had been with Evelyn. He chose a quiet evening at home after they'd cooked dinner together, something he'd never done before meeting her. The ring wasn't some massive diamond that would weigh down her hand, but a delicate vintage piece he'd found in a small antique shop, its Art Deco design reminiscent of the era she so often spoke of with fondness. When he knelt before her, ring in hand, Evelyn's face went through a complex series of emotions: joy, fear, hope, and something else he couldn't quite identify. For a long moment, she said nothing, her hand trembling slightly in his. "Michael," she began, her voice thick with emotion, "there are things you don't know about me, things I should tell you. Whatever they are, they don't matter," he interrupted gently. "I love you, Evelyn. You've brought light and meaning into my life. You've helped me remember who I am beneath all the success and achievement. I want to share my life with you, if you'll have me." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Later that night, as they lay together on the terrace lounger, looking up at the stars barely visible through the city's light pollution, Evelyn seemed lost in thought again. "Are you happy?" Michael asked, pulling her closer. "Yes," she whispered, but her voice held a note of something that sounded almost like fear. "So happy it frightens me." The wedding plans quickly took on a life of their own. Despite Michael's wealth and status, they both wanted something intimate, meaningful. But the press caught wind of the story: the successful tech mogul marrying a retired surgeon 20 years his senior, and suddenly their private joy became public property. Through it all, Evelyn maintained a quiet dignity, though Michael noticed she seemed increasingly anxious as the wedding date approached. She avoided photographers, declined interviews, and seemed to withdraw slightly from the social circles they'd shared. "We could elope," he offered one evening, seeing the strain in her face as she reviewed yet another article about their upcoming nuptials. "No," she said firmly, though her hands trembled slightly as she set down the tablet. "No, we'll do this properly. Some things need to be faced head-on." The comment struck him as odd, but before he could question it, she changed the subject, asking about his sister Lisa's unexpected RSVP to the wedding. "She hasn't spoken to me in years," Michael mused. "Not really. Not since." "Since what?" Evelyn prompted gently when he trailed off. "Since I missed our father's funeral for a product launch," he admitted, the shame of it still fresh. "She said I'd lost my humanity, that I'd forgotten what really mattered in life." She was right. Evelyn took his hand, her touch comforting as always, but something in her expression seemed troubled. "Family is complicated," she said softly. "Sometimes the hardest bridges to rebuild are the ones we burned ourselves." As the wedding drew closer, Michael found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed in less than a year. The emptiness that had once consumed him had been filled with something real, something meaningful. Yet there were moments when he caught Evelyn looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, as if she were memorizing his face, preparing for something he couldn't understand. But love, he had learned, required trust. Whatever shadows lurked in Evelyn's past, whatever secrets she held close, he trusted that she would share them when she was ready. For now, it was enough to know that their love was real, even if parts of their story remained untold. The wedding day arrived with all its promised grandeur, but amid the celebration, Lisa's presence catalyzed the truth's emergence. As the ceremony reached its peak, she recognized Evelyn as her long-lost Aunt Alice, who had vanished decades ago after a family tragedy. The revelation sent shockwaves through the gathering, leaving Michael reeling with the knowledge that his bride was his aunt. Evelyn, or Alice, finally shared her story of fleeing from past trauma, changing her identity, and building a new life. The accidental reunion with Michael had awakened both joy and terror in her heart, leading to her eventual decision to reveal the truth. The scandal rocked their social circles, and the marriage was quickly annulled. In the aftermath, Michael withdrew from public life, seeking therapy and struggling to reconcile his feelings. Through this period of reflection, he and Lisa rebuilt their relationship, finding strength in their shared pain. The experience transformed Michael's perspective on wealth and success, leading him to establish a foundation supporting families dealing with estrangement and trauma. A year later, At a family gathering, Michael and Evelyn met again. Time had softened their pain, allowing them to acknowledge their genuine, if complicated, connection. The family, though forever changed, found a way to heal together. Michael's foundation flourished, channeling his resources into helping others navigate similar family complexities. In the end, Michael discovered that true fulfillment came not from wealth or status, but from understanding, forgiveness, and the courage to face difficult truths. His journey from emptiness to purpose became a testament to the power of family bonds and the possibility of redemption, even in the face of life's most challenging revelations.